thank you all for joining us and welcome to this Battle Bluetongue Virus Update End of Year webinar. My name is Zoe Lloyd. I'm an Animal Health and Welfare Scientist at AHDB, and I'll be covering off the housekeeping before handing over to your chair for this evening, Rudolf Raquel. Rudolf is the veterinary lead for the Small Ruminant Expert Group for the APHA. I'm delighted to be joined today by some excellent speakers, including Gordon Hickman, who is the Head of Exotic Disease Policy for DEFRA, who will be providing us with an update, as well as initial results on the winter surveillance and preparations for 2026. We also have Neil Shand, who is the CEO of the National Beef Association, who will be providing us with an overview of the impact seen in 2025 and a little bit of what to look out for heading into 2026. And we'll also be joined by Rob Hall, who is a farm vet with LLM, who will be bringing a vet's perspective to the discussions. We were also due to be joined by DERA following the recent confirmation of cases in Northern Ireland. However, unfortunately, they are no longer able to make this webinar. But please note that any questions around the situation in Northern Ireland, we will still gather and seek answers from DERA and keep the Ruminant Health and Welfare website updated as the situation progresses. But for specific advice, please do see the DERA website, and I will leave a link to this in the chat too. So just to cover off a few housekeeping points before we get started, this webinar is being recorded and the link will be circulated within 24 hours to those who have signed up. If you do have any technical difficulties today, please know that the recording is being shared and you will be able to watch it back. It will also be uploaded onto YouTube, so you're able to share with anyone who may have missed a tune in live. We also do have a QR code to record your CPD there in the corner. And please do put your questions in the chat box at the top right-hand side of your screen. Here you'll see a speech bubble with a question mark in it. We will hear from our speakers first, and then we'll come round to questions at the end. At the end of the webinar, you will get the option to complete a feedback form where you can inform us of questions and topics you're interested in. We would really appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to fill this in, as it really does help inform us of what you'd like to hear more of. And please do keep an eye out on the Ruminant Health and Welfare and AHDB websites for future webinars too. So I just wanted to highlight the tools and resources we have available on the AHDB and Ruminant Health and Welfare Bluetongue Hub for those of you who may not know about them. There are a range of tools designed to help support vets and help farmers make the decision on whether to vaccinate their stock against B2B3 and when. They're all completely free to download, so please do make use of these, and all available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare and AHDB websites. So before we get started, I just wanted to make you aware of the Bluetongue Impact Survey, which we're currently running, which has a closing date of the 31st of December 2025. We would really appreciate it if you could spare some time to complete this survey, as it really does help inform us of the impacts seen on farm. We have been receiving responses since the end of October, but the more responses we can gather, the better, as this will really help us understand the impact Bluetongue has had on UK herds and flocks and help us assess the ongoing effects of the disease so we can support the ruminant sector in managing the impact. The survey is completely anonymous unless you choose to provide your contact details too. For awareness, there is lots of additional support available out there. These organisations are also available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website for you to find out more. And then lastly, this has been an industry initiative, and I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's been involved. So without further ado, I will now hand over to our chair for this evening, Rudolf. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. So yeah, just extending a very warm welcome to everyone that joined us this evening, including those that joined us from Northern Ireland. So to set the scene for tonight, just a brief summary. We had about 237 cases of Bluetongue in Great Britain in the 2025 Bluetongue season, so that's since July 2025. England had over 200 cases of Bluetongue. Most of these were BTV3, but there were a few cases of BTV8 too. Wales had 15 cases of BTV3. No cases were recorded in Scotland. And then we had recent confirmation of 2 cases of BTV3 in Northern Ireland. So just a definition of what we call a case can be more than one animal and actually refers to a holding or a farm that tested positive. In addition, we need to tell you there's 3 Bluetongue serotype 3 vaccines that can be used in Great Britain. Conditions for use are available online. This BTV webinar is the final one on this platform this year. There will be more next year, but the dates still needs to be confirmed. So we will listen to all our speakers and then we will answer any questions at the end. So please enter your questions in the question box as we go. So we have 3 speakers today, and we start with Gordon Hickman from DEFRA to cover policy, technical updates, initial winter surveillance results, and preparations ahead of 2026. Over to you, Gordon.
Thanks, Rudolph. If someone could drive the slides for me. So I think many of you know me by now. I have come to a number of these. So I'm DEFRA head of the Exotic Disease Control team. I will try and cover Northern Ireland at the end, but just a reminder that my policy area is only England, so I can really only speak definitively on that. In terms of update, well, Rudolph has covered a fair bit of this already in his introduction, but for the current vector season, and that technically started in March, but our first real case associated with this vector season wasn't until July. We've had 241 cases. 233 of them were Bluetongue 3, so only animals, at least one animal on that premises was Bluetongue 3 positive. We've had 7 premises farms where we had both Bluetongue 3 and Bluetongue 8, and 1 premises where there was only Bluetongue 8. I should perhaps apologise. I seem to be going in and out of focus somewhat, so look at the slides, not me. And as Rudolph said, almost all of them are in England, although there are 16 in Wales, none in Scotland, and we'll pick up Northern Ireland at the end. On those 241 premises, there are 576 positive animals. Please don't assume that that's the only positive animals on those premises. For surveillance cases, we only sample 14 animals, and for report cases, we typically only sample up to 3 animals, sometimes 5 animals. So there could well be a significant number of positive animals on a farm, but we've only definitively assessed them in the number of animals that we test. Of those positive animals, vast majority are cattle. 91% are cattle. 50 animals were, or 9% were sheep, and 3 or 0.5% were deer. That is, of course, again biased by the fact that in terms of surveillance, we only sample cattle. And as Rudolph said, by comparison, in the last vector season for the whole of that period, we had 264 cases. Next slide. You saw from that map that there was a significant cluster down in Devon and Cornwall and along the south coast, but also some sort of clusters in the Severn Valley and in sort of Derbyshire, Cheshire, and a few in the home counties. That's just a chart showing which of the counties. So Cornwall is by far and away the largest number of cases with 51 cases, and then there's the odd places where there is just one case. We don't really know why there aren't many cases in sort of the areas where they were positive last year. So that's either underreporting or vaccination, or the fact that they were previously exposed, so have a level of acquired immunity or total immunity. It also could mean that there isn't circulating virus this year in terms of wind-borne incursion. So difficult to know without doing surveillance in those areas. Next slide, please. So how have we found them? So just over half, so 54% have been found by report cases. So that's clinical suspicion of disease. So that's either the typical range of clinical signs that we're seeing: lameness, fever, crustiness around the muzzle, etc. All those cases where we've got abortions or dummy calves, etc. So over 50% through that route. Next highest lot is the Bluetongue winter surveillance, of which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. Then pre-movement testing, private testing, and a number of the cases in Wales through temporary control zone testing, or the Wales winter surveillance, and you can see how that tails off there. In terms of the Bluetongue 8 cases, 5 of them were picked up in winter surveillance, but the very first one we picked up was through a report case, so clinical signs in a sheep, and then the second one was also in Cornwall, clinical signs in a bovine, and we found an additional one while we're doing some testing on an IP. I gave the sort of the figures early on, so most of them have got both Bluetongue 3 and Bluetongue 8 on the farm, although one with Bluetongue 8 only. Important to say that there is no evidence of co-infection. So what do I mean by that? I mean that individual animals weren't infected with both Bluetongue 8 and Bluetongue 3, so they were separate animals on that premises. So there was both viruses present. At the moment on Bluetongue 8, we've only found it in Cornwall and on the Isle of Wight. So we may detect more as part of our winter surveillance on the south coast, or we may pick it up through clinical signs, and we may not pick up any more this mid-season. At the moment, we are not saying that Bluetongue 8 is circulating, although I think increasingly there is evidence of that. And when I say not circulating, clearly there are a number of places where we do have Bluetongue 8 in Cornwall. What we don't know yet is if they're all wind-borne incursion to separate farms, or whether there is, if you like, animal to animal spread through midges. And we'll take a view at the end of the surveillance period as to whether we decide that it is circulating or a series of multiple incursions. Next slide, please. So a little bit about winter surveillance in England. There are also winter surveillance programs in Wales, along the border of England and Wales, and in Scotland, again along the border between England and Scotland. As I said before, there's one case so far detected very recently in Wales from that winter surveillance. I don't have the information about progress of that winter surveillance. This map really just shows the number of the location of our winter surveillance. So the plan was really to look for evidence of incursion of other serotypes. When we first set this up, we hadn't got Bluetongue 8 present, and so it was very much designed to pick up possible incursions from France and from Belgium, less so from the Netherlands, because we'd obviously knew we already had Bluetongue 3 circulating. Hence the strip along the south coast, and those dots are where we've either sampled or about to sample or have, in our words, recruited premises. We've completed, so our target is 112 farms across the south coast. They're all cattle farms, and we sample 14 cattle or 14 bovines on each of those farms, and test them for all of the Bluetongue serotypes. As I say, we've done 64, so 52 of them have come back positive. So that's a much higher percentage than we've ever had in the past. 62% being positive, and we've had, as I said before, those Bluetongue 8 positive cases in in Cornwall and on the Isle of Wight. The others have all been Bluetongue 3 positive. So far, 32 are negative, which is 38%. So I think it really does show that there is still a lot of undisclosed infection. So that's obviously largely subclinical infection in cattle. But that doesn't, of course, mean that there won't be concerns in spring calving animals or in terms of fertility or milk drop or whatever. So that's all on surveillance. We can pick up any questions afterwards. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what happens now. It's obviously much colder now, but the first thing to say is that the current temperatures or recent temperatures mean that it's now too low for active virus spread via midges. So again, what do I mean by that? I mean that if a midge bites an infected animal, the temperature is not high enough for that extrinsic incubation period to be completed this year. And so even though it's taken an infected dose, if I can put it that way, that midge can't spread it to another animal by biting it. So that's really good news. And that's one of the reasons why a number of the relaxations came into force earlier on at the end of October, early November, in terms of moves to Wales and Scotland. However, vector trapping has identified that some midges are still feeding. So we are still finding midges in our midge traps, much lower numbers now, but at least we are still finding them. So that does mean that if you've got an infected midge that's already completed its extrinsic incubation period earlier on in the summer autumn period, you can still get infection, and that's particularly in those sort of warmer microclimates that you might find in buildings, for example. And that may well be the reason why there were a number of cases in Northern Ireland that they weren't expecting, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Our experts at Pirbright and in the Met Office have now concluded that given historical trends and data and temperatures, we're unlikely to get any further vector incursions from mainland Europe. So we shouldn't get any new infected midges coming across from Europe. Although it's good news on midges, and we've said this before, obviously, but just a reminder that transmission can still occur through infected germinal products, and obviously an infected pregnant female can transmit it through maternal transmission to their offspring. So, we can still get positive cases even after we don't get any midge-borne transmission. Next slide. So what should keepers be doing now? Well, be alert, I think, for clinical signs. As recently as yesterday, I think we confirmed a positive report case. In that case, there was some crustiness around the muzzle of 2 cattle, but there was a history of abortions on that farm. So look out for fertility issues, including abortions, and then perhaps it may be a little bit early yet for dummy calves and starved gazing calves. But again, please keep a lookout for them as we get into sort of January and February. If you remember back to January, February last year, that was a real obvious trend, particularly in Norfolk and Suffolk and Kent and down into East Sussex, where they had all those infections last year. And given the amount of infection in Cornwall and Derbyshire and along the south coast, I think we can expect to see further issues later on or early next year. Just a reminder that Bluetongue is still notifiable, so please do report it. We've spoken about the process for investigations, certainly in England. You'll be given a code, and private vets can submit up to 3 or 5 samples, and government will pay for the testing, but farmers will have to pay for the veterinary cost of doing that sample. And a reminder for vets, if you have been given an ERZ number, please put it on the sample submission form, because otherwise you or your client will get charged for that. And I'm sure Rob and others will start talking about vaccination, etc. But if you haven't vaccinated, or you vaccinated 12 months ago and are thinking about boosters, please talk to your private vet to determine whether Bluetongue 3 or, dare I say, Bluetongue 8 vaccination is right for you and right for your animals. That's very much a discussion between you and your private vet. I am coming to the end, you'll be glad to know, but next slide, please. So I was asked to say a little bit more about what will happen next year. Obviously, I can really only talk on behalf of England, but I think you can expect to see the restricted zone being in place for, dare one say, the foreseeable future, whilst we've still got infection. Can you hear me, by the way? Can you hear me, Rudolph?
Yes, we can, yeah.
That's fine. I've just had this odd message come up to say I need to switch device, but that's good. Thanks, John. We have no plans to change the policy on movements within England. So basically free movement of live animals within England. We are still planning to retain our restrictions on germinal products. And we get asked about that. Well, why are you putting restrictions on frozen products, but yet my bull may well be positive and can move around the country and through natural service? This is really about protecting the long-term future, because obviously frozen semen could be used at quite a long time in the future, and we don't want reintroduction of the current strain at some stage in the future. We've got no current plans to change how suspect cases or clinical cases are reported or investigated, but we will keep that under review. If, for example, we were to get totally inundated in number of cases or whatever, we would potentially revisit that, and there are some models in the Netherlands about how different countries are doing that, but that's probably a subject for another webinar sometime in the new year. And I think I've probably alluded to this, but we will review our Bluetongue 3 position once winter surveillance is completed. But I think it's highly unlikely we'll introduce any new zones or put in place premises restrictions for Bluetongue 8. But we reserve the right, if we were to find Bluetongue 1 or 4 or any of the other, whatever it is, 23 notifiable serotypes. If we were to find Bluetongue 1 or Bluetongue 4, I think we'd almost certain, well, we would put in place premises restrictions while we did epi assessments, and we might do a temporary control zone, but that's where we're at. Next slide, please. Really just wanted to thank Pilar in particular and APHA colleagues for all their ongoing work and notification, sort of analysis of cases. Now, I've just got a couple of slides on Northern Ireland. I know even less about the position there, but I'll do my level best. Next slide. So basically, Northern Ireland, their Bluetongue 3 status from an EU perspective was suspended on the 29th of November when they found, I've called it a non-negative abattoir surveillance sample. So in Northern Ireland, they have a very robust programme of surveillance across all susceptible livestock through their abattoir network, and they picked up 2 samples from cull dairy cows, and they were tested at AHDB, which is their Northern Ireland laboratory. So we call them non-negative because they're not a national reference lab or an EU reference lab or an OIE reference, sorry, a WOA reference lab. So those samples, although they were positive, had to be sent for further diagnostic testing. What they did, and it's the second, the blue dot on the map, the lower circle, they put in place a temporary control zone. Samples were sent off to Pirbright, and Bluetongue 3 was formally confirmed on the 3rd of December. That triggered a whole load of whole herd testing. It was a reasonable size premises with dairy and sheep, and again tested through AHDB, and they detected a further 44 positive animals, all cattle. I'm not sure if they've all been formally confirmed yet, but we can reasonably expect them all to be positive for Bluetongue 3. And that's where I was really talking about that microclimate, because all these animals were housed, and they put a midge trap in the vicinity of that shed, and they detected some viable midges, so active midges in that area. So there may well have been some local transmission within the sheds. Epi assessments are still ongoing. Obviously, much in the same way as our own approach in England and in Wales, they then started doing surveillance in the zone. And the red dot, which you can see, or the red diamond, they detected a positive case in the temporary control zone. And I think that was on the 6th of December. And so a further temporary control zone has been put in place. I assume that there will be some more surveillance in the northern part of that zone that isn't covered by, if you like, the southern temporary control zone. So that's the position in Northern Ireland in terms of confirmed cases. So 2 positive cases, if you like, and at least 47 positive animals. In terms of what are the implications for Northern Ireland and for movement between NI and GB to NI, I'll do my best to answer that. New slide. So surveillance is ongoing. there are no current moves allowed out of the temporary control zone to the rest of Northern Ireland or to Great Britain. As of, I think, no, that has been allowed for a while. So there are moves from the TCZ direct to slaughter are permitted. So you can move to slaughter from the temporary control zone, but moves from Northern Ireland can now happen back into the temporary control zone, and that's under a general license. Moving out, I guess, a bit closer to home. So, and I've called it movement from areas outside of the temporary control zones. So that's really the free area, but free area is an interesting term because Northern Ireland has lost its EU free status and its UK country free status. So it's just areas outside the TCZ. So animals can move to Great Britain under the existing, pre-confirmation situation. So that's under, if you like, the normal import general license and certification, and that the same applies to live animals or germinal products from outside of that zone. No change to the situation that was pre 29th of November. However, things can't move the other way. So no movements are permitted still between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, despite their change of status. So the situation hasn't changed in relation to Northern Ireland's regulatory regime in terms of its compliance with the Windsor framework. So I think, Rudolph, that's it. There's a couple of links for further information, which I'm sure Zoe and colleagues in Animal Health and Welfare and the Ruminant Health and Welfare Board even will share. But there's a lot of really good information on the Northern Ireland website. So sorry that's slightly longer than perhaps Build, but tried to pick up the situation in Northern Ireland as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gordon. So we'll move over to our next speaker, Neil Shand from NBA, and he's going to talk about the impact of BTB3 on cattle and also on industry in 2025, and also what to look out for and how to prepare ahead of 2026. Over to you, Neil.
Great, Rudolph, thank you. So a very extensive presentation from Gordon, and I apologize in advance that there might be a little bit of duplication. So I've been involved in a core group since November 2023, and it's quite incredible how many times I think we've discussed Bluetongue in 2 years and half a month or thereabout. And I think it's also quite incredible that it is only in the last 10 days or so cropped up in Northern Ireland. I'm not an expert in geography, but if you look at the distance, the sea distance between the Netherlands, Belgium and England, and how relatively close Northern Ireland is to GB, I think 20 miles is the closest point, whereas the other continent, at least the part of the continent we suspect Bluetongue to have came from initially, is more than 5 or 6 times that distance. But anyway, that's where we are, and I think I would view this disease sometimes as silent and very often an invisible threat. And we had seen significant impacts in suckler beef production in the eastern side of the country at the start of this year. And based on that, and I'll come back to this later, on Gordon's slide on winter surveillance and ultimately cases since July this year, there's a large amount of disease being picked up North Staffordshire, Derbyshire, Cheshire, down in Cornwall, eastern counties, and almost below Oxford towards the top side of London. There's a little hub there as well. So what impact we saw last spring calving this year was quite horrific for some of our members and breeders, and it was caveated by the fact that whilst they were on the eastern coast where the initial incursion was seen, or the biggest one perhaps, in August 2024, they saw no clinical signs in these herds during the summer and autumn last year. The first indications that were sort of realised were empty cows at scanning, and even then Bluetongue wasn't attributed as a cause, because you get years where you know, for a multitude of reasons, you can have a higher number of empty cows. As we got closer to spring calving, there were a higher than normal number of late pregnancy abortions, and then that was followed by stillborn or dead calves, and then, as Gordon has called them, non-viable calves, or stargazing calves that, you know, just stood with their neck tilted back and gazed upwards. And I think when some of these animals were subsequently PM'd, they had no brain, or very little in terms of brains. So that gives me concerns for these areas since July this year, where we've seen a high prevalence of disease. And I think everyone should be very vigilant, pregnancy scanning cows, etc., and any abnormalities as we lead towards calving. We kind of reached out to sheep scanners, and I know not all sheep are scanned, and it's in some areas will be quite early for that, to see if there was any early warning signs coming from that. I have to caveat that by saying that there was no early warning signs came from that through Norfolk, Suffolk, Kent, edge of Lincolnshire, etc. last year. So whilst it's not guaranteed to give us a heads up, it might have, you know, given us some indication. I would like to think, Gordon commented that there's been less disease in Norfolk, Suffolk, Lincoln, at least identified this year. Whilst there will be a degree of underreporting, I think anyone that was bitten with this last year will have vaccinated their cows. In the extreme cases, there are a couple of herds that have got less than 50% production. A near 100 cow herd that's got 48 calves, and an 80 cow herd that was left with 40 viable animals, and you know, that's not sustainable, and those losses will hurt those businesses for several years to come. So whilst we've heard already that there are 2 strains currently circulating, it's prominently BTV3 that we are seeing, and for me, that would be the first option for vaccination until we learn a little bit more about BTV8 and see if it just lingers in that sort of geographical area that it seems to be in at the moment. There's no question vaccination is the best defense, and you know, not being a vet, but could, you know, create debate and argument perhaps for vets. There'll be various times where you can or could vaccinate. If you haven't done it up until now, I would certainly consider it. If not, certainly do it. As Zoe alluded to at the start, you know, AHDB have got some tools out there, and they're separate for sheep and beef, cost calculators to see, you know, what the cost benefit would be of vaccinating or not vaccinating, obviously dependent where you are. There's no question, I think, that the amount of cases there's been recently, the disease will overwinter. So vaccinating now, in theory, or from now until, you know, the turn of the year or into early January, if it's not too close to calving, in theory would probably give you, and I caveat this, probably give you a year's cover. We are still waiting for confirmation that the Boehringer vaccine, Boltavac 3, will give 12 months protection against viremia. I stress that information is not yet available, but it is the best bovine vaccine so far. So I would encourage everyone to protect their herd and go out and vaccinate their cows over the winter period, whilst it's easier to do so when they are inside. I repeat, this disease in many cases is silent, it's invisible, it wasn't seen, and whilst, and Gordon said, we've not seen a lot of cases this year in some people's eyes, but my view is an awful lot of them were clinical signs, and we've seen a lot more clinical signs this year than we saw last year, and then we saw the impact last year, or the disease had, last year during the late summer, autumn on this year's spring calving. So for me, it's quite simple. Go out, get some vaccine, and invest in your herd safety in future. Rudolph, that's all for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Very valuable insight there. So now over to our final speaker, Rob Hall from LLM Farms, Farm Vet. So a bit about vaccines and fertility rumors from a veterinary perspective. Thank you, Rob. Over to you.
Thanks, Rudolph. So very quickly about me, I'm a farm vet working in the northwest of England and North Wales. And part of the reason I was asked to speak tonight is about my experiences with our vaccination in the Channel Islands. So as part of a team of 3 vets from our practice, I work for the farmers on Guernsey. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I've also seen there's quite a few questions coming into the chat already about germinal products and fertility. So I'll touch on those. I do a bit of work with stud bulls, so I can provide some insight on our experiences, both working with stud bulls and the germinal product side of things and fertility, but also our experience of vaccination in across our practices. So to start talking about Guernsey and the Channel Islands, the situation on the islands, or specifically on Guernsey, is we've got 11 dairy farms with about 1,500 milking cows, about 2,500 bovines in total, if we include beef animals and young stock, dairy young stock. There was a joint decision made by the state vets for Guernsey and Jersey to take a kind of combined approach and quite a belt braces approach, and based on their proximity to northern France, where we have 3 vector-borne, midge-borne diseases circulating. Certainly we did this time last year when the strategy was being devised. So we've got circulating Bluetongue 3, BTV3. We've got circulating Bluetongue 8, BTV8, and we also have epizootic hemorrhagic disease, AHD. So another midge-borne disease, which maybe we should be getting worried about at some point. But I think it certainly has been causing some problems in northern and eastern France. Anyway, the state vets made a decision that they were going to fund vaccination for ruminants on the islands, in the Channel Islands. And so vaccines were provided to farmers and animal keepers free of charge, effectively, to vaccinate their animals. So I guess the success story, and kind of why I was asked to speak here, is that ultimately vaccines were rolled out and we haven't seen any cases of Bluetongue, despite the close proximity to France. Now, a slight caveat to that is there hasn't been a massive amount of active surveillance going out and testing animals that don't have clinical signs. there's been some investigations into suspected cases and screening batches of animals within herds where we had suspected cases, and again haven't found any evidence of Bluetongue being present in those herds. So a massive success story, and I think what I was just going to touch on, that's people will criticise that as a success story because we're talking small numbers of animals over small numbers of farms. But I think if we look to some of our colleagues in Europe and the experience they've had of Bluetongue 3, mainly we're talking about here, if we look at the Netherlands and Belgium. So I've scribbled down some figures just to look back at what happened in Netherlands. So if you look at Holland, Netherlands in 2024, there were more than 10,000 PCR or clinical sign positive sheep, more than 10,000 positive cattle. It seemed like they kind of stopped recording. They got so many. And they were seeing problems with those animals. So there was at least 1 kilo a day of milk lost. So that's across the whole year. So I think in the exposure period, they were seeing 2.5–3 litres of lost milk yield in the dairy herd, which persisted for 6 months or so. And as has been alluded to by the other speakers, both early pregnancy losses, poor scanning results effectively, as well as late-term abortions and fetal malformations. These are the brain defects that we're seeing in calves that were infected in utero. So similar to BVD, it's affecting the parts of the brain that are responsible for balance and muscle control. And so we're seeing calves that are staring, stargazing, slightly tremoring. It's not just the same part of the brain, but there's wider neurological effects. But what we're seeing is dummy calves that sit there, stare there, don't do very much. The Netherlands rolled out a vaccine program and had pretty much 100% uptake of vaccination across their cattle and sheep herds. And in 2025, they had 0 cases. So we've gone from tens of thousands of cases to 0. And therefore 0 milk losses, no abortions, no fetal malformations. Belgium had 2,500 herds affected and over 1,000 flocks affected. What they found is that resulted in 21,000 additional cattle deaths. So effectively about 1% more of their national herd died in 2024 than would have been expected. On the sheep flock, they had 24,500 excess deaths. So that's about 6% of their entire sheep flock in the country died, more than was expected. So they would expect a certain level of losses, 6% more of the flock, national flock, died. Same stuff, abortions, early pregnancy losses, calf malformations, and also what Belgium saw was a big dip in the number of calves born roughly 9 months after the exposure period. Sheep, again, they saw a short-term drop in fertility around breeding periods. What did they have? Well, they had 0 cases in sheep after vaccination. They have had 11 cattle herds affected, but we're going from 2,500 to 11, of which I think 3 were Bluetongue 3 and 8 have been Bluetongue 8. So the message here is there were, we can look to mainland Europe and see countries that have had, I guess, what they saw was early problems in 2023, big problems in 2024, then they brought in vaccines and there's been no problems in 2025. So that's the story. When we look to what's going on in the UK, and I think some of some of the speakers just now have touched on this. But what we saw in the Midlands and the Northwest was that we had no cases last year. This is when we were looking down country, and we're looking to East Anglia, we're looking to the South Coast, and they were already seeing cases back in the tail end of 2023, and as a result they've seen tail end of 2024, and have seen significant numbers of cases in 2025. We didn't really see that here in the Midlands, but we weren't getting cases, but there's a lot of movement of animals, certainly to and from East Anglia into Staffordshire, Derbyshire, and so I think the decision to vaccinate in the Midlands was taken on a predicted or projected risk in this area. And final kind of point I think I want to make is about the side effects on the vaccine. So we have sold over 20,000 doses of Bluetongue vaccine across our little group of practices, LLM farm vets. As far as I'm aware, we have seen 0 adverse reactions in terms of cows getting sick or lumps and bumps or whatever, beyond the little injection site reactions. We've seen no drop in fertility of cattle, female cattle, and I think importantly, from working with stud bulls, we have vaccinated over 250-ish breeding bulls with Bluetongue vaccine, and see no decrease in semen quality or fertility from that point of view. So hopefully that reassures some farmers about the safety of the vaccine, as well as the effectiveness of the vaccine. But there's more questions out in the chat, and I'm happy to hopefully answer some of those.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rob. So we can get all the panelists back on screen, and then we'll try and cover some of the questions. Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'll go for the first question, I think probably to Gordon. Will the UK ever be clear of BTV with warmer weather lasting longer?
I think a lot will depend on what happens on the continent, because if it's on the continent, we'll definitely get it here because it'll just blow across. There is evidence that this thing tends to go in 3-year cycles, but I think it's here to stay, at least for the foreseeable.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Next question: can UK exports ever restart?
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But it will rely on a vaccine being available that has a guaranteed period of immunity. So at the moment, Neil alluded to it just now, we expect that at least one of them will have a marketing authorization that specifies that it'll have a guaranteed period of immunity of, let's say, 12 months or at least 6 months. And once you start getting that, then vets can start certifying, depending on who you're trading with, but then that becomes possible. You would still need to vaccinate against all strains circulating in the country. So that would mean that you would have to vaccinate against Bluetongue 8 and Bluetongue 3. I think there is a question about Bluetongue 12, of course, for which there isn't a vaccine. But there is no evidence that that's circulating. We found 1 case, the Netherlands found 12 cases. So I think there's a plausible argument to say that that's not circulating. The position about Bluetongue 8, that's why I was really saying at the moment, we haven't yet made a decision as to whether it's circulating or whether it's multiple incursions from northern France. going forward. I think it's more likely than not that it is circulating, given the number of cases and the geographic proximity, but we need to do that epi assessment, and the CBO needs to take a view on that. So the answer, I think, is yes, but not now.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, next question. With recent Bluetongue confirmed in Northern Ireland, what are the requirements from DEFRA for exports from Northern Ireland to GB regarding germinal products?
So I think I've hopefully covered that in the presentation, but as long as it's from outside of the 2 temporary control zones, there is no change from the original requirements for germinal products. I don't know the exact details, but I think they all have to be tested and managed through a centre and certified by a vet. No difference from export from Northern Ireland to us to any other international things. So if you were able to get it before, you should be able to get it now.
Okay.
I'll just jump in on that. So there's quite a few questions about movement of germinal products, which, as Gordon said, have all, well, for several years been covered by Bluetongue regulations. Effectively, there are options for how you can certify that a germinal product, or a live animal indeed, is free from Bluetongue. One is that it's produced and stored outside of a Bluetongue zone, which unfortunately in England isn't currently possible. You know, we are in a Bluetongue restricted zone. In Northern Ireland, it's just going to be those control zones, and there'll be a retrospective period. So any germinal products collected in those zones, there'll be a date set prior to the confirmation of disease. The other ways of being able to export germinal products or move germinal products in and out of restricted zones are to test the animals either for antibodies or PCR test. Again, there's windows of when that needs doing. And those are going to be the mainstay of it. So we still have germinal products moving out of the UK currently, and in and out of restricted zones. So for embryo transfer, what we're doing in England and Wales is taking blood samples at a time of flushing, and I think a week after flushing for PCR testing. For bulls, for semen, and I guess rams, goats, billy goats, whatever. Again, it's probably going to be a PCR-based test program. But yeah, germinal products can be moved. We just have to prove that the donor is free of Bluetongue at the time of collection.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So then there's a question for areas such as Northern Ireland that are in the early stages. Should we be vaccinating or waiting until closer to summer? I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Neil? I know it's Northern Ireland, but...
Yeah, so I probably can't comment, Rudolph, on some Northern Irish related questions. We've had a few questions in the last week. There'll be a number of people planning to send high-value breeding bulls from Northern Ireland to sales in GB in the early part of next year. Now, we understand, and Gordon has confirmed, that movements from Northern Ireland into GB can happen. But my understanding is, so far, and we are waiting confirmation, unless, Gordon, you've got it, if they go into Scotland, they will need to be vaccinated first. So,
I mean, my understanding is that from the if you like, the free area of Northern Ireland, the same rules as happened before it was confirmed can go to anywhere in GB.
Yeah. So, but to protect people, you know, if you've got stock that you're planning to send out of Northern Ireland, then I would vaccinate them and open every avenue you have, and every sale you have. And in terms of, sorry, Rudolph, in terms of, you know, animals that are going to remain domestically, then again, it's a discussion with private vet to analyse the risk.
Brilliant.
Quickly,
Okay.
sorry, have vaccines been authorised in Northern Ireland? Because there will be a period where DERA, I'm guessing, will have to authorise their use.
It is already authorised for use, Rob. There's a license. I think it's a specific license in Northern Ireland from memory, but there are the same 3 products are authorised for Bluetongue 3, and they will have a similar situation for Bluetongue 8.
Okay, I know we're at the end of our scheduled time, but since we've got a fair few questions and this is the last webinar, if our panelists are okay, if we can try and carry on for another 10 minutes perhaps to try and answer as many of these questions live. Those that we don't answer, we will add to the frequently asked questions on the Women Health and Welfare and AHDB websites. Okay, so quickly on to the next one, probably for you, Rob. We have given all our sheep 2 doses of BTV3 vaccine in line with our vet recommendations, but now we've got BTV8 that appeared. So what is the current situation regarding availability of vaccine for BTV8?
As far as I'm aware, the vaccines for BTV8 have not yet been authorised.
Okay.
And we are still currently seeing very limited numbers of cases of BTV8. So yeah, it's something that we're looking forward to, but until vaccines are authorised.
So I think it's slightly different to that, Rob. That there is a general license that permits the use of 1, 4, 8, 1, 2, 4, and 8. So it's legal to do it, and there's a separate license for Bluetongue 3, obviously. But you're right, there are no vaccines in the country. So there are authorised vaccines back from 2007-8, which are still authorised. Not all of them are still available or being manufactured, but none of them are here. So to get them in, you would have to apply for a special import certificate through VMD. And that means, you know, someone like Rob having to go through that process to get it in. So it's not straightforward. We are working with the core group and our vaccine task force just to explore demand and what the options are. I think it's unlikely that any of the vaccine manufacturers will suddenly start, you know, supplying wholesalers unless there is a market, because the reason it isn't here is that there wasn't a market before. So I think they will want to know a bit more about the market first. So not immediately available, but it's not as perhaps as bad as it was at the start of Bluetongue 3.
Excellent. Okay, so next question is, bearing in mind the high winter surveillance levels has been picked up, is it therefore not now the case for wider surveillance across England to enable farmers to be informed of the risks and thereby encouraging vaccine uptake? I don't know if you have a comment on that, Gordon.
I mean, I think DEFRA's got better things to spend its money on than doing a lot of surveillance for something that's clearly widely spread, circulating. If you go looking for it, you find it. So I think my message is it's circulating everywhere in England. We know it's in the borders of Wales. I think you make your decision on the back of that. And if you want to do some private testing, again, that's a viable option. But we have to be very careful in how we spend our money. So I don't think we'll be doing more widespread surveillance. The reason for doing the winter surveillance was to reassure ourselves that there isn't other circulating strains, and that's a trade matter again, so that when we get that guaranteed period of immunity, we're in a better position to be able to reassure trading partners.
And then, are there ways to determine if cases such as the BTV8 cases are from wind-borne incursion or whether they are from local spread?
I don't think that, unfortunately, it's not a virus that sort of changes or reassorts, so you can't really tell whether it's local transmission. The virus that we found is, whatever it is, 99.8% the same as the strain in France. So I don't think we'll ever genuinely know. The real way of looking at that is, you know, are you getting new cases? What's the sort of the serological profile? Are you getting differences in CT levels? We've always had a sort of a rule of thumb that once you start getting more than about 10 animals on a premises, that is likely to suggest that it's local transmission rather than, you know, a load of midges blowing over. And we're just on that cusp at the moment. So that's why I'm saying that we'll wait and review the position once we get the full picture. So unfortunately can't tell you.
Okay. And question, lost it now. So are there any ideas or thoughts why it appears to be the Bluetongue here is less virulent, producing less severe clinical signs and less cases compared to what's happened in Europe, as you explained, Rob? You know, where we saw really big numbers affected, and it appears to be a lot less severe in England and probably Wales as well. Don't know if anyone has got any thoughts on that.
I don't think anyone really knows, Rudolph. I think we've all been surprised by this. You know, I was at a symposium the other week with a number of you know, veterinary colleagues from over here, and nobody could really explain it. You know, there's probably a whole load of factors. So it arrived here later than anywhere else, so there wasn't the temperature profile to have multiple circulations. There may be a breed effect, there may be a stocking density effect, and there may be a total number of, you know, we know that one midge biting an animal can cause disease. What we don't know is if, you know, 15 infected midges bite the same animal, whether that could sort of overload immune systems, etc. I just don't think we know that. So I don't know the answer. I don't know if Rob's got any hypotheses, but I think we're all surprised.
No, I think it's something we've wondered why we haven't seen more cases, or certainly we haven't seen the severity that's been reported in Europe. Yeah, I guess our question was, is it because we're only getting bitten by one infected midge, so you're only getting kind of one case rather than a handful of midges with a higher viral load going into animals? Don't know.
Okay.
Right. Rudolph, sorry, if I could just, but I don't think we should ever be complacent yet, based on the fact that we've not seen it, and I'll very much keep the focus on continuing to be vigilant and vaccinate as much stock as possible.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You know, both Rob and Neil spoke about the fertility impacts. You know, just because you don't see, you know, those immediate sort of lameness or fevers or anything doesn't mean to say that you won't get those fertility impacts. You know, we've had a number of private tests come through that just says, you know, investigating following poor fertility in milk drop. I'm sure nobody suspected to be Bluetongue at the time, and this is a, you know, just a differential, but they've all come back Bluetongue positive. So I suspect there's a lot of fertility issues that people have put down to other endemic diseases that were actually Bluetongue, and we just don't know what's going to happen for fertility in the spring. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I wrote down. I just said my notes basically say low scanning rates this time of year is a warning sign that we could expect high rates of late-term abortions and deformities in spring.
Okay. Excellent. I think we run out of time, so I think we'll have to stop there and hand back over to Zoe to close us up. So, but in any case, thank you very much for our panelists and for all the excellent questions. Over to you, Zoe.
Hello, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone on the webinar tonight, all the speakers. Thank you very much, Rudolph, for chairing as well. And thank you very much for all your attendees that have tuned in and sort of submitted your questions as well. As Rudolph said, any questions that have gone unanswered, we will be collecting them and we will make the answers available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website in due course. Brilliant. I just want to say thank you all very, very much again for your help, and I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.